Welcome, everyone, to Inquire Live at Gameday Central alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are live from the MetLife Stadium press box, getting set for the Eagles' Week 6 matchup against the New York Jets. EJ, how are you doing on this fine fall day?
I'm doing well, Olivia. I had a nice drive up. It's I honestly don't mind the commute to MetLife as much as some people. If you're an Eagles fan, like watching this at home, I don't think it's a bad commute. It's like an hour and a half. It's a lot of good rest stops. The last rest stop before the stadium is actually my favorite. There's a Starbucks there. So yeah, no, everything's good. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you, EJ. Throughout the season, everyone, we will be coming to you live 90 minutes before every single game. And you can also be a part of our conversation. We would love to hear from you. You can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day. Leave us a question, leave us a comment. We will address some of those toward the end of our show in one of our favorite sections we like to call Fan Zone. So love to see you there. Let's get right into it, everyone, with our health report. Typically, we start with the Eagles, but I think today we really need to start with some of the Jets inactives and a couple of really big names. In starting outside cornerback Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, they will not be playing in today's game. EJ, how does this change the matchup for the Eagles in their passing game?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It reminds me of some Eagle seasons in the past where injuries kind of rack up at the cornerback position, and all of a sudden you've got guys like Craig James playing, which is a good segue to who will be playing for the Jets. Former Eagle Craig James, he was a practice squad player for the Jets who has now been called into starting duty, along with Bryce Hall on the other side. He's a fifth-round pick from 2020. So, yeah, the Jets cornerback room was like their usual starters, Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. They're really good. That's a really good duo. It's about as good a duo as you'll see in the league, especially Sauce Gardner, coming off an all pro season. So, really changes the complexion of the game, obviously. I think going into this, I think the Eagles will always feel good about their matchups on the outside. But, I mean, man, you have to feel a lot better going up against two guys who are not the typical starters. They just have a lot of injuries at that spot. So definitely changes the complexion of the game. Like you said, we usually won't start with the Jets or the opponent's injury report. But this really did change, how I think this game is going to go.
The Jets are down a couple of important players. The Eagles are also down some important players, too. Let's talk about the players that we already knew going into this game weren't going to play. Cornerback Darius Slay out with a knee injury. Defensive tackle Jalen Carter out with an ankle injury. Safety Justin Evans out with a knee injury. And wide receiver Quez Watkins out with a hamstring injury. Of those players, I mean, a few very important starters, especially in Slay and Carter. How does this impact the Eagles' plan specifically on defense?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick, which is a testament to how good Jalen Carter's been. It's hard to pick who may be the more impactful loss. The Eagles are deep. Well, they're deep at defensive tackle, but Jalen Carter has been one of the best defensive tackles, interior rushers, pass rushers in general in the NFL so far. So that's a big loss. Fletcher Cox is coming back. We can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, that's definitely a big blow to their defensive tackle rotation. Just having that constant pressure from the inside has been a big part of what's made that pass rush so effective through 5 games. But I mean, you really can't overstate. Like Darius Slay has been in the lineup for the last few years. He's kind of been like a cornerstone of this defense since the Eagles traded for him. Josh Jobe is a player we've seen, so far this season. He's somebody who has a lot of game reps. So I think you maybe could overlook it, but I do think, I guess, especially against a good receiving core, led by Garrett Wilson, and then there's some good veteran receivers in the Jets rotation. It's definitely, I think that Slay's absence could really be felt here. I mean, again, he's been kind of like a steady presence on that back end. I mean, the Eagles secondary has changed a lot because of injuries over the last few weeks, but I think that Slay, I mean, that's a huge absence.
Coach Nick Sirianni said later this in the week that he doesn't expect Slay to miss significant time. However, we'll keep an eye on what his practice status is next week going into a very challenging game against the Miami Dolphins next weekend. Also worth noting that Evans and Watkins have both been placed on injured reserve, so they will have to miss at least the next 4 games. So then let's talk about a couple of players that we weren't necessarily not expecting to not see play today. In safety, Sidney Brown, he's out with a hamstring injury, and defensive tackle Marlon Tuipulotu, he is out as well with a triceps injury. Both players were listed as questionable for today's game. I mean, we already discussed the depth at defensive tackle, but looking at safety, I mean, geez, there's no Justin Evans, no Sidney Brown. Starters likely and Terrell Edmonds. But what's going on with the safety position? Do you think? How concerned are you about that?
Yeah, I mean the safety spot is really thin. They were thin going into the season. It's something that they've expected. I think they came into the season expecting to be thin at that spot, and now they really have two guys at safety. It's I like you mentioned Reed Blankenship and Terrell Edmonds as the expected starters, and who backs them up? It's honestly it's a good question. I mean, Mekhi Gardner is active,
Mhm.
Keely Ringo is active. Those are two names that if they need somebody at safety in spot duty, that they might be the answer. But I mean, yeah, it's definitely not an ideal way to go into the game. Sidney Brown's hamstring injury. And a lot of people will tell you hamstrings are tricky; they kind of linger. He's missed. This will be his third game miss. I mean, yeah, at some point they're going to need to figure out a depth option, and maybe we do see that at some point today. Maybe we see Keely Ringo or Mekhi Garner or Mario Goodrich, whoever it may be, because I do think that that's a position like it's really scary to go into a game with just two guys on that. It's an instinctual position. The Eagles' defensive scheme might make it a little bit easier to plug guys in there just because it's not maybe as complicated as some other schemes, but it's still a position where you want somebody who's got experience.
Mhm. That's a long list of players who are not playing today. So let's give you some good news, everyone. Inside linebacker Nakobe Dean is set to make his return after spending the last several weeks on injured reserve with a foot injury. And then, EJ, as you mentioned, defensive tackle Fletcher Cox returning from a 1 game absence, dealing with some back pain. What kind of impact do you expect the two players to make, not only just considering kind of the absence of Jalen Carter among the defensive front, but also looking at Nakobe Dean trying to insert himself back into a lineup that has kind of started to figure some things out without him?
Yeah, I mean Fletcher Cox. If you were concerned about his back at all, I think any of those concerns were quelled with his showing at Citizens Bank Park. I mean, he looks like he's in a pretty good mood, and yeah, he's moving around pretty well. So yeah, I mean, I think that he's a big part of he's was their leading snap taker at defensive tackle even after missing a game. He still was higher than Jalen Carter. So they're really leaning on him. I mean, can they keep doing that? Is that really sustainable? I'm not sure. Even he mentioned throughout the week that they got to be smart with him and they got to make sure to kind of pick spots. But he also mentioned like he plays a part in this too. He doesn't always want to come out. He doesn't always want to come off the field. So I think they're going to have to be smart about managing that throughout this season, and especially today coming off of the back injury. Never heard of an epidural procedure. I mean, I'm sure it's happened before. Usually you hear that in the labor and delivery stories more than anything. So definitely a strange one for him, but listen, I think that they're going to have to use him today because I mean with Jalen Carter out, Marlon Tuipulotu out, you're going to have somebody, especially on those early downs, kind of take up some of those snaps. So probably be Jordan Davis and Milton Williams. Maybe we see more Contavious Street, but I mean Fletcher's going to be in on the pivotal downs especially. So.
Mhm. All right, let's move into our latest headlines portion of our show, talking about some of the big storylines. I think a big storyline in today's game is the storyline that no longer exists. When we all saw this schedule initially released, saw that the Eagles would be facing the New York Jets in Week 6, at least in my mind, I said, hey, this is the first real test of the season going up against quarterback Aaron Rodgers. However, Rodgers is dealing with an Achilles tendon rupture, so he is out at least for the regular season. We'll see if he tries to make some sort of comeback in the postseason if the Jets make it that far. However, now the Jets have turned to quarterback Zach Wilson in Rodgers' place. He's progressed in some ways over the last several games. In his last two in particular, he's completed over 70% of his passes. EJ, how does the test that the Eagles are set to face in today's game compare to the test that they were most likely going to face had Rodgers not exited?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I did my preseason record prediction, this was the first loss that I had the Eagles. This was their first loss against the Jets when Aaron Rodgers was healthy. I think that the test kind of changes now. Maybe it's not as much of a test of can you play one of the elite quarterbacks of this generation and, get a win on the road. It's more about, can you not overlook a team that, is banged up. The Eagles are obviously a little banged up too. I don't think, I think we don't talk about this as much because Jalen Hurts is wired in a way where the Eagles typically don't overlook opponents, even lesser teams. Jalen even has had moments where he's chided the media for not asking enough about a defense that doesn't look very good on paper. But I still think this is a good test for this team. To get off to a 5-0 start and come on the road against a team that again is really banged up. And doesn't maybe look as dangerous on the schedule. We've talked about it all week. I think that will be a good test for them. This is really one of the last walkover games they're going to have for a while here. And a big game, against the Miami Dolphins to look forward to next week. Cowboys coming up, and then the bye week. I do think that there's a chance that they overlook this one a little bit. And again, that might be more of the test than again playing against one of the best quarterbacks that we've seen in a few decades.
The Eagles are coming off of a road victory over the Los Angeles Rams. The defense really stood out in this game, particularly in the second half. They held quarterback Matthew Stafford to 9 completions on 20 attempts for 75 yards, 0 touchdowns. They continue to be one of the top defense against the run in the league. What is the key to starting this game the way they finished against the Rams last weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're going to have to just settle in, which, maybe it's not going to be a quick start, the same way it was last week where didn't look good on those first 2 series. But I mean, I think that Sean Desai deserves a lot of credit for kind of figuring out, how to deal with the ebbs and flows of the game, letting Slay cover Cooper Kupp for a stretch there and then going back to what worked, and going back to, the original plan after halftime. So I think that that's going to be part of it today. Obviously this Jets offense is not as talented as the Rams offense was. But again, they've got moving parts on the back end. I think it's going to be about finding the formula that works, being able to be flexible if things aren't working. And then again, having a feel for, what the situation calls for. I think the pass rush, again, this Jets offensive line has been a big topic for several years, and I don't think they haven't done a good job protecting Zach Wilson. They didn't do a good job protecting Aaron Rodgers in the short time he was there too. So, I think that it's always going to be about the pass rush for the Eagles, and I think that that's going to be the case today.
Conversely, the Eagles' offensive line continues to be strong in protecting quarterback Jalen Hurts. And as a result, Hurts has continued to take steps in the passing game and even in the running game as well every single week. The one area the Eagles' offense hasn't taken a step in my opinion, is in the red zone. The Eagles' offense is ranked 27th, converting on just 42.1% of their opportunities down there. Last season, they were the 3rd ranked red zone offense. Words. What is at the root of the issue, EJ, when you look at this? Is it the play calling? Is it the execution? Or is it a combination of everything?
Yeah, I think it's obviously always going to be a little bit of both. But I think what really stands out when you watch back the red zone clips and try to figure out what's really ailing them, it is a lot of execution. The Quez Watkins screen comes to mind. I think there's a lot of running plays on early downs that just don't get them into situations where they're ahead of the sticks. Maybe it's a little bit of they love the quarterback sneak so much. They know that they have it in their back pocket and they're not as aggressive. They're just trying to get to 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 so that they can convert and, get a fresh set of downs. I think that, again, this kind of spans the play calling and the execution. It's always going to be, a little bit of both sides of it. So if I had to pick one, I'd probably say execution. I think, you see some mistakes, you see some missed, open receivers from Jalen Hurts. You see some running lanes that maybe weren't hit, in the way they were supposed to be. So, I mean, I think some of this is going to be like the ebbs and flows, some regression to the mean in red zone offense. But you mentioned it, Jalen Hurts' running ability has been a big part of why the Eagles have been so good in the red zone. We saw him get back to that a little bit against the Rams. We saw him really just operate with a little bit more reckless abandon, for better or worse, being a little bit in these have to have it situations. And I think that that's a big part of what has made them special in the red zone. So I think it's a good sign for the red zone offense that he's maybe getting his sea legs back a little bit, kind of having that sense of when to get down or when to, invite contact or take on contact. I think if that's going to be a big part of their red zone offense moving forward, then they'll probably get back to, what it was the last few years.
EJ, you mentioned the Eagles' offensive line. Center Jason Kelce is going into today's game. It's a big milestone for him, and technically he has not reached that milestone. The second that he steps on the field for the Eagles' first offensive series, he will reach it. He is set to hit 145 consecutive regular season game starts. That's quite the. I mean, it's an incredible record. It's something that he tied the previous record this past week against the Los Angeles Rams. John Runyon had established that record. I talked to John Runyon earlier this week, and he was very effusive in his praise for Jason Kelsey, and also he's been there before. They've gone through very similar experiences of playing through injury, and I think in this day and age, we try not to glorify playing through injury as much as maybe in the past. However, that's just, it's not really a glorification thing. It is what it is. It's, if you want to play 145 consecutive regular season games in the league, there's a good chance you are playing through some sort of something. And Kelsey has been very transparent about that, whether it's in talking to the media, through his documentary that was released on Amazon this year. So it's quite the impressive record. It has not come without its challenges, as we have all seen. But yeah, we are just moments away from him finally accomplishing that. So
I'm gonna say it because you're not gonna say it. You should go read Olivia's piece. It's a very well done piece with some really good anecdotes in it. So be sure to go over to inquirer.com/Eagles and you can find Olivia's piece there.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. And while you're over there, you can go over to inquire.com/Eagles Gameday and you can leave us a comment or a question as we are about to answer some of those right now. Before we actually take some of those from our Inquirer page, we're going to take a couple questions from Twitter. Mr. Krabs, good friend over on Twitter, he asks, I'm a huge SpongeBob fan, so I love that this person has taken on the Eugene Krabs persona. Which current Eagles coordinator / position coach has the best shot of becoming a head coach next year? Most obviously, of course, there's defensive coordinator Sean Desai, offensive coordinator Brian Johnson. However, in addition to those two, EJ, who stands out to you as a potential candidate to become a head coach?
So yeah, those guys are the obvious ones. They're both young coordinators. Kind of on that upward trajectory. Kevin Patullo is the passing game coordinator. He kind of flies under the radar, but I mean, when you talk to players and coaches, he definitely has a big role in what they do every week. He has a history with Nick Sirianni, dating back to the Colts. So I mean, I think that he is maybe somebody that fans or the outside narratives or whatever you want to call it. I'm not trying to demonize it, but whatever you want to call it, I think that he sometimes falls by the wayside. You see him on the sideline a lot near Nick Sirianni. He's definitely got a big role in the offense. So, he's gotten looks before for offensive coordinator jobs. So yeah, I could see him. You never know. Maybe one day somebody's like, hey, can Jeff Stoutland do what he does with the offensive line for an entire organization? I mean, you don't really see offensive line coaches, just jump the line to, no pun intended, to head coaching jobs. But I mean, I think he's a well enough known entity at this point that you could see a team kind of like kick the tires on him in that type of situation. I don't think the Eagles would be happy for that, though. I think that they would make every effort to keep him, whether it's title changes or money or whatever it might be. So yeah, but I think it's funny, like if I had to pick between Desai and Johnson, like I'd say Desai's performances have been better, like in-game adjustments and play calling. But I mean, offensive guys always have the leg up. I feel like, everybody wants to find the next great play caller, the next great offensive mind. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, again, I think Eagles fans are probably a little bit scarred from last offseason when both coordinators, ended up getting head coaching jobs. It's definitely something that happens when you're winning. So.
Thank you, Mr. Krabs, for your question. Let's move on to a question here from Jamie on Twitter. They want to know, do we see more double teams on A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith with both Jets starting cornerbacks out? If you're the Jets, EJ, how do you even begin to attack the Eagles passing game with as talented as receivers as A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are, especially considering A.J. Brown is coming off of 3 straight games posting over 100 receiving yards?
Yeah, well, first off, I wish that Jamie was like Sandy Cheeks or like, maybe Gary. Like, I would have liked to continue the SpongeBob trend here, but I mean, I do think that there's a good chance you'll see something in terms of like, trying to stop AJ Brown. I think coaches sort of see the same thing we see, and they're like, we have to come up with a plan. But I'm a little curious, like, with all of the moving parts that they have, with 2 cornerbacks who probably didn't get the lion's share of practice reps. I mean, Sauce Gardner was a late addition to the injury report. So I imagine that he was practicing in the first few days of the week. So I think some of those plans probably go out of the window when you've got guys who haven't been practicing all week and just aren't established members of the defense. So, maybe some of the exotic stuff or the creative stuff that the Jets had they're probably not going to go to it. They're probably going to try to stick with, in the past, I remember the Eagles when they had so many injuries, they would try and stick with man coverage or zone coverages that you install day one of camp. Just have the simple stuff that guys can execute, because if you try to get cute or you try to get into these more complicated calls, sometimes you're going to blow a coverage just because these guys haven't had reps, especially in game. So I mean, I think that AJ Brown's going to be a focal point. I think that they're probably going to, I mean, listen, like stuff like cover one double isn't necessarily the most complicated thing in the world, but I mean, I don't think you're going to see like exotic stuff to try and take these guys away that you saw maybe in the first couple weeks of the season.
It's a good question. We will see what the Jets end up doing to try to contain the Eagles receivers. Thank you so much, Jamie, for your question. Let's take a comment here from Bad Love. They want to know, or they say that the Eagles need all hands on deck for the Jets, makings of a trap game with the Dolphins and their speed coming up next week. EJ, when you look at this game, I know we already talked about no Aaron Rodgers. You got Zach Wilson missing a couple of their starting cornerbacks. How important is it to have come out strong and have a resounding win against the Jets, knowing that you've got a very challenging team coming up next week against the Miami Dolphins?
Is Bad Love like a Taylor Swift reference, you think? Maybe hinting at
Bad Blood. Bad Blood would be the reference.
Oh,
Go on.
yeah. I'm not a Swiftie. Sorry. But no, I think that you kind of hit it right on the head. If the Eagles come out flat and kind of let the Jets hang around in this game, I think that it might, come back to bite them. I feel like the Eagles are just built, and we've seen it so much in the last 2 years. The Eagles are built to get a lead early and then just drown teams out with, running the ball, dominating the clock, dominating the time of possession, and letting the pass rush really make an offense one-dimensional and take advantage of that one-dimensional nature of a team trying to, chase a game. So, I mean, if they come out flat and they spot the Jets a touchdown or two, and all of a sudden, they have to come back, I do think that the game won't go exactly the way that the Eagles want it to. I think that, again, the way that this team is built, we just see it so much where they get out to these early leads and just take control of the game. I think that if they come out flat because they're, a little bit maybe overlooking this team, they could have their hands full. I mean, the Eagles always love to say it. Nick Sirianni loves to say how it's really hard to win on the road. So I think that again, I mentioned this earlier with Jalen Hurts, it's not as much of a thing as it maybe has been, with a normal team or, most teams where, the Eagles will overlook opponents. But I mean, listen, it's human nature to come up here and see the injury report and think that they're going to win. So.
Thank you so much, Bad Love, for your question. Thank you, everyone, really, for your questions. Let's head over to our next section of our show, which is our predictions, my second favorite personal section of our show. But before we get into our own predictions, let's hear from our colleague, Jeff McLean, for his own.
Hi, I'm Jeff McLean, Eagles beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer and podcast host of Uncovering the Birds. All right, let's talk about this Week 6 matchup at the New York Jets. The Eagles come in 5-0. The Jets are 2-3. And while they're coming off a victory over the Broncos, this is still a team that is struggling, certainly since the loss of Aaron Rodgers on one of the first plays of the season. Coming into this game, it looked like this might be a test for the Eagles, finally against a New York Jets team that has never beaten the Eagles in all these years. But Rodgers is out. Zach Wilson is in. And the young quarterback has struggled pretty significantly. Now, look, he was a deer in headlights those first 2 weeks. I don't think anyone can dispute that. But I think we've seen some improvement out of the young quarterback, especially with that run offense, which can really gobble up some yards in the ground with Breece Hall. They're averaging almost 5.5 yards a carry. Hall's averaging over 7 yards. So that is an opportunity for the Jets to kind of drag this game out, shorten it out so that the Eagles offense isn't out there on the field as much. The Eagles run defense, of course, is one of the best in the NFL. Now, it looks Jalen Carter's not playing, so that could hurt that unit up front, but Fletcher Cox is back. They still have a lot of horses up front that can slow that run, which will force, I think, the Jets to have to pass in certain situations. They're going to have to throw the ball, and that really plays into the advantage of the Eagles up front, specifically on the edges against this Jets offensive line that is not strong at tackle, and especially now at right tackle. Max Mitchell is going to be starting for the first time this season, and I really think that Hassan Reddick, who's come on the previous 2 weeks, has an opportunity here to tack on some more sacks to the 3 that Area has this year. On the other side of the ball, the Jets, they have an opportunity here to kind of keep things close if they can get to Jalen Hurts, if they can slow the run game down. They have a lot of horses up front. Certainly, Quinnen Williams is one of the best defensive tackles in the league. I think they have some pretty good edge rushers in Bryce Huff, Jermaine Johnson, and then the second level, two of the better off-ball linebackers in the NFL, and Quincy Williams and C.J. Mosley. Sauce Gardner is one of the best cornerbacks. He was questionable entering the game with an illness, so we'll see if he's ready to go. But I think this is a scheme the Eagles can attack. Look, this is a one-gap penetrating defensive front that Robert Saleh likes, and I think that allows the Eagles an opportunity to get the screen game going, specifically to Dallas Goedert, who's coming off his best game of the year. And I think, while the Jets have done well against tight ends, I still think there's an opportunity for Goedert to get some to get his this week, as they say. And of course, on the edges with AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins is out, but Olamide Zacchaeus, they can stretch the field, and I think they have an opportunity against those safeties to get beyond them and have some big plays with Jalen Hurts, who seems to be getting better with each week. And if that's going to happen against a Jets team that's just not that great, I think the Eagles have an opportunity to really explode here and win significantly. So I'm predicting the Eagles win 33-16 and move the 6-0 for the second straight season. All right, guys, that's it here from me. Back to you at Gameday Central.
All right, Jeff, thanks so much for your prediction. EJ, I hope you brought your crystal ball with you all the way up here to New York. What is your prediction for today's game?
So I have a soliloquy before I make my prediction, which is that, listen, we are evolving human beings. We can take in new information and change our opinions on things. So I had the Eagles winning 24-17. When I wrote my prediction, DJ Reed was questionable, and he was limited in practice. Wasn't sure if he'd play. And Sauce Gardner was not on the injury report when I wrote my prediction. Sauce Gardner being ruled out is a huge difference, and it's almost like a fun thought experiment. Like, what is an all-pro cornerback worth on a touchdown per game basis? And for me, I feel like that's at least 7 points. I could see it being more. I could see it, listen, I've seen enough games where the Eagles have been really thin at cornerback and it becomes disastrous. So I had the Eagles winning 24-17 in today's Enquirer. Again, rewarding our viewers who make it this far. I'm at Eagles 31-17, right before kickoff here.
You've inspired me, EJ. I think I'm also going to adjust my score just a little bit. I initially, when I made my prediction, if you read it over on Enquirer.com or in the paper, my prediction for today's game was 27-17. So very close to yours, an extra field goal. However, I'll add an extra 3 points on there. I'll say 30-17. Not quite there. It could be 2 field goals. It could be a touchdown and a missed extra point. I don't know who's to say, but we'll find out if we're even there. But no, I agree. I think the late additions to the inactive list for the Jets has some big implications for the Eagles and their offense. It's just a matter of kind of what it's been for the Eagles over the last few weeks. Can they get out of their own way when they're in the red zone? Are they going to be able to score when they're down there? It's a big question. Jake Elliott has been good for them, and he's been, as they say, I believe Braden Mann told me, nails. Jake has been nails for them. So we'll see exactly how they score their points down there when they are down there. That being said, I think this will be another win for the Eagles today. All right, our final section of the show, our Enquirer player picks. We've talked about a bunch of different players in today's show. However, EJ, if you had to pick one that you are zeroing in on in today's game, who's it going to be?
So last week I picked Devontae Smith, and it went pretty bad for me. I mean, he had 1 catch for 6 yards. Maybe I should get out of the who's going to have a big game business. But you know what? I'm not going to learn from my mistakes. I'm going to go back to Devontae Smith. I'm going to double down. Listen, we talked about A.J. Brown earlier in the show, the run that he's been on. I think the defensive coordinators do kind of look at something like that and go like, listen, we have to have a plan for this guy. And they might, get a little bit take some liberties on not taking as much attention toward the other side of the ball, which is kind of how the Eagles offense has been. So, I think Devontae is going to get involved early. If any history of the Eagles play calling is to, an indication, I think that he will probably get involved early just because, the lack of production in the last game. So, I'm going to go Devontae Smith. I'm not going to learn from my mistakes.
Fair enough. That's all right, EJ. We'll see about Devontae Smith and his performance in today's game. I'm going to be keeping an eye on a defensive player in inside linebacker Nakobe Dean coming back to the lineup for the first time since week 1. The big question is how is he going to fit in to what has already become somewhat established duo on the field in Nicholas Morrow and Zach Cunningham? How is Sean Desai going to opt to use Dean on particular types of anticipated plays, whether it's maybe he likes Dean a little bit more in coverage than he likes either of the other two. So I think that's something that we'll keep an eye on as Dean is slowly getting ramped up and getting set as, just getting back into game action for the first time in several weeks. So big questions there. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. We, as always, love chatting with you, but it is not over. There's so much more fun to continue to have. If you go over to inquire.com/Eagles Gameday, we will be chatting with all of you throughout the game, posting our comments and our insights in real time for the press box. So we look forward to seeing you over there.
That's right. And remember to stay up to date on all of our Inquire sports coverage by subscribing to our Sports Daily newsletter. You'll see our most recent articles along with other Phillies, Sixers, and college sports coverage. A lot of Phillies coverage right now. You guys got to get on that as they go to the NLCS. A lot of the articles referenced throughout this segment will be over there.
You can also keep up with Philly's most seasoned beat reporter on Uncovering the Birds with Jeff McLean. You can listen to that podcast wherever you get your podcasts or go to inquire.com/podcasts. That's all for today, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into Game Day Central. We'll see you next time.